When I was in seminary, we went home for Thanksgiving break. I believe it was my first year of seminary, and we had a celebration, a little Thanksgiving party before we all left, and everybody bid their farewells for the long weekend, and everybody, most people, unless their drive was too long, went home to spend time with their families. Over the trip, I received an email that one of the guys in the house who was going to be ordained a deacon within 6 months had gotten in a car accident on the way home and had died. So it was kind of shocking. Somebody you just saw a few days earlier, on the way home on the very same roads that we had all traveled, that same day had perished in an accident. So when we returned back to the seminary, we had a memorial mass for him. He happened to be from Poland and was studying for a diocese here in the United States, but his body was taken back to Poland and his funeral was back at his home with his family. So none of us were really able to attend his funeral, but all of us gathered when we returned, and our rector very poignantly had this to say in his homily. As with most homilies, and when somebody who's 25 years old dies, it's hard to explain. There is never an explanation for such a tragedy. But he put into words a reality that still sticks with me to this day, and put into perspective this concept that I think we all need to put our own minds, or wrap our own minds around today. He was killed when their car slid off the road, and he and another traveler got out of their car to fix the problem, and in doing so was hit by a passing vehicle. And the rector reminded us that this condition of humans coexisting with multiple thousand-pound vehicles careening down highways at 70 miles an hour is not natural. Nor is it natural to suspect or reasonable to suspect that we should survive in such an environment, such a hostile environment to our very fragile bodies. And I think perhaps a lot of times we take all these things for granted, that we have this bubble of safety around us, that we're almost invincible. But we live in a world that really is not to how we were created. It's really contrary to our nature. Standing on the side of a highway is not a safe place to be. We should have zero expectation of safety on the shoulder of an interstate. And I think this was stuck with me and profound, because we can think of all the tragedy, or why did God let this happen, or why did all this happen? But in retrospect, we can also think of, well, why do we put ourselves sometimes in these situations? Now, I don't blame him for his own death. I don't think he got out of the car thinking he was going to get hit by a truck. But when we put this in context of our own readings, and we examine our own lives and our own world, I think we have a lot of things in our own control that many times we disregard, and we pretend we have this bubble of invincibility around us and think that we'll survive. Who are we? If we don't know the answer to that question, everything else is rubbish. The whole issue of theology, the whole issue of religion is pointless if we don't know the starting point, us and God. In fact, in seminary, again, one of the very first classes we took is we call human anthropology, the study of the human person. If we don't know who we are, we can never understand our relationship to God. We are human beings. Many of you could probably say that and get that right on Jeopardy. But what does that mean? Our second reading today says we were made lower than the angels. This week we celebrated the feast of the archangels and the guardian angels. In the order of creation, when God created all things out of nothing, there was a hierarchy, as there remains today. When he created all things, there was God, there was the angels, there was man, and there was everything else. But man was different, and the angels were different, because man and angels had this thing called free will and intellect and the ability to love. And man is particularly unique because in the scripture we hear that God made man in his own image and likeness. In his own image and likeness he made them. Man and woman he made them. This is very important. We don't go into such detail about the creation of the angels. And we're going to see, and we will see later, when Christ doesn't become an angel. Christ doesn't become some other creature, right? Christ eventually becomes a human being. And man surpasses the angels in the order of creation because of that great gift of the incarnation, God becoming one of us. So humanity is special in the whole order of everything. We are a divine reflection of God. Just last week, I was talking to the children in our school. I can get first and second graders to understand this, so I hope to God I can get you guys to understand this. When we look at ourselves in a mirror, and I get everybody stumped on this, even high schoolers this past week, I ask, what do you see? You don't see yourself. That's the wrong answer. That's the trick of the question. You see your reflection. It's not yourself. If you were to punch the mirror, to break the mirror, you are not affected. It's your reflection. When God looks at us, he sees his reflection. He sees himself in us. Now, obviously, it isn't based completely on physicality, because look around, we all look different height, color, size. But we reflect God inside as well as outside. Obviously, outside there's enough commonalities that we can point to say that there is some similarity. We know what humans look like and what humans don't look like. But on the inside as well, there's a similarity. There's that uniqueness of humanity. And when God looks down, he doesn't just see the outside, as a mirror, unfortunately, can only reflect the outside of who you are. Our reflection to God reflects the whole of us, body and soul. But there's more to this story than just a reflection of God, just radiating him back to himself. Genesis tells us that it was not good for us to be alone. That God created all things good. We hear in the account of creation, the 5 days that preceded the creation of man, that all things were created good. The light, the dark, the stars in the sky, the hills, the oceans, the fish, the birds, the cattle, the creeping things, all things were good. But suddenly in our reading from Genesis today, it starts off and says that God said here on the 6th day that it was not good. This good creation became not good because he looks at his reflection and sees that he is alone. It was not good for him to be alone. His reflection is lacking, is missing something. And so from Adam's side, God fashions a woman. Not to be superior to him or him superior to her, but as equals. As our scripture says, a suitable partner. The Hebrew says a helper fit. A helper to do what? To help him to be what he was created to be, that divine reflection in perfection of his humanity. Adam couldn't do it on his own. There was something profound in him that was lacking when he was by himself. And it's summed up in Adam's own words when he wakes from his slumber and he sees this woman. And this is, some people I've told this before, this is my favorite line in all of Scripture, definitely in the Old Testament. This one at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. He sees obviously another person. She's different than the giraffes, the dogs, the trees, all the things that populate the earth. But in her, while she is different, he sees himself. He sees how she and he have an equal dignity, how they are both reflections of the same God from which they came. While different, very different in outward appearance and inwardly unique in their own creation, they are also reflect together that radiance of God's splendor. And together, precisely as we hear, the two become one. Their differences in complementing each other come together as a puzzle is pieced together. And the two flesh becomes one flesh. That which was not good becomes, as the scripture says, very good. All of creation was good. And now all of a sudden, God looks down and it is very good. Because this unity of the love of man and woman has now propelled creation beyond where it was just as a reflection of God to a perfect imitation of He who is love. Deus caritas est. God is love. And man was now able to do what God did, loved. He couldn't love the animals. He couldn't love the earth. He couldn't love the stars or the sun or the moon. But this one at last, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, I can love. Man plus woman, or as we know as marriage, equals very good. And so we fast forward to our gospel today. The issue of divorce comes up. The scribes and Pharisees are trying to trick Jesus into giving them a way to, again, condemn him, to contradict Moses, which would be the greatest of blasphemies. Divorce then, like today, as Christ says, is because of the hardness of the human heart that the union of man and woman falls apart. But it was not created to be that way. That was not the plan of God. God's plan is for the two to become one, and that which God has formed, which God has created, man must never separate. In our own world today, we see this work of division attacking this most intimate and primordial bond of humanity. in so many ways, and it goes way beyond divorce. I was contemplating, what am I going to preach about? The scriptures are loaded today. But we just look at ourselves. We're trying to live contrary to our nature. We're trying to live on the side of a highway and expect not to be hurt. We've divorced ourselves, not just literally from spouses as the divorce rate continues to climb higher and higher and higher, but we've divorced ourselves from each other. Man was created for each other. By ourselves as individuals, we are not good. Together, we are very good. And yet we live in a society that says you must be independent, you must be alone, you must be all by yourself, an army of one. You have to be able to move on a moment's notice, to cut ties with everybody around you, and to go from here to there, and never look back. We've divorced ourselves from who we are as human beings. A communion of people bound in love. And it trickles down into everything else that we see in our world. War, divorce, abortion. Today is Pro-Life Sunday. We're going to be standing out witnessing to life. Of course, it's the great scourge of our age. But it didn't just happen. It's a result of many actions in which we tear ourselves apart from each other. I mentioned this before. The Greek word for the devil, diabolos, means divider. The Pope has brought this up and mentioned this in one of his homilies. The devil's work is to divide. We saw it in the garden between Adam and Eve. They point fingers at each other. It wasn't me, it was her, it was him. The first sin was this work of division, of divorcing man from woman, human from human. The more we try to separate ourselves from each other and to be independent and to be on our own, the more things will continue to spiral out of control. The more wars will continue to persist. The more all the disharmony and disunity in our world will continue to persist. The continued murder of innocent children, the continued abuse of the poor and the elderly, the continued onslaught on our environment, the continued onslaught on our own selves. All of this will continue more and more until there's nothing left but the remnant who looks to God, just as the faithful remnant gathered so many times throughout the scriptures, who see, who know, and follow the truth to happiness that Christ teaches us. As he says, come to me as children, with simple minds, simple hearts. If you can accept this reality and not get so full of yourselves, so full of your own ego, so full of your own pride, but just come and love, you will be blessed. That's the challenge for us all. We can divorce. Divorce is one of our creations, and not just applying to marriage, to every human relationship. We can divorce each other all over the globe, from every institution that we see fit, or we can come together. We can be one in the heart of God, and one with each other. That's the challenge in following Christ and following the gospel. And the challenge resides in your heart. Who are we? We are the reflections of God, who is love. And as that reflection, we're called to love him back, both now and forever.